Enjoy with your headphones for a better listening experience.
Please watch till the end of the video to have the most scariest part of the story.
Truck drivers, what's a creepy story you've got from the middle of nowhere? Episode 3. I'm a delivery driver for a florist. About 2 or 3 months ago, I had to deliver an arrangement of about 2 hours drive into the country from the city near the end of my shift. When I arrive at the address, I don't see any houses but these old farming sheds and a really long dirt road. I get out of the truck, grab the arrangement, and walk down this dirt road. Sun is pretty much about to disappear, and I've walked about 10 minutes and am questioning whether or not I should have braved driving the truck down. I finally see this old shack with a light on, so I walk up to it. I'm about to go to the front door when I hear from around the side of the house, "Just leave it." I answer, "Does live here? Just leave it by the door, it will eventually get to them." I do so and walk as quickly as I can back to the truck, lock it and drive away a bit quicker than normal. Back when my dad was a freight train driver, he had to stop at a red light in a wooded area in the middle of nowhere. The guard of the train, who's usually at the back of the train, radioed to tell him that it's going to take a while, so Dad got off his cabin to take a leak. As he was watering the bushes, he saw a relatively well-dressed man approaching him and he asked my dad to give him a lift to the nearest station. This man had a backpack and for some reason, an axe. Dad decided to give him a lift and asked him to take a seat in the cabin. All throughout the 2-hour journey to the next station, the man didn't put down his backpack or his axe. He was eyeing him constantly through the corner of the eye and read a manic expression that you absolutely don't get from a lumberjack who had gotten off work 2 a.m. After dropping off the man, the guard and my dad notified the police officers and gave them the man's description. A month or so later, the department was issued a notice to not give lifts to strangers as the man they had picked up was a gang member and had just shot a man and buried him in pieces in that general vicinity. Not a truck driver but in a tour van with a rock and roll band. Tasmania circa 2007. We have a gig a few hours drive from the capital city Hobart out in the central tablelands. The driver was some man who had volunteered that we didn't know, and about half an hour into the journey he tells us he had dropped some acid. Pretty situation, but we had committed and were on the road, so. Anyway, we did the gig and are returning to Hobart, and it is about 2 a.m. Typical in the middle of nowhere scenario, and as we come round a corner there is a helium-filled balloon sitting in the middle of the road. Just floating around like it is meant to be there. I said to the driver, "Acid head, did you see that?" He starts freaking out and pulls the bus over. I assure him the balloon was real as I saw it too, which makes him even more freaked out because his acid mind couldn't understand why the balloon was there if it was not a hallucination. I learned how to drive a bus that night and got us home. Also, the next day we read in the paper that after we left the gig a massive brawl had started in the town we had left, and a bunch of people had been injured. Tassie is a wild place. My dad started driving trucks in 1971. A story he told me once was how he was driving through the night to pick up a load of cement. He had a headlight burnt out, so he kicked on the high beams to be able to see, and there in the middle of the road was a CHP car, doors all open and the lights off, sitting in the middle of the road. He came to a stop and got out to see if anyone was around but couldn't find anyone, so he got back into his truck and kept heading for the cement plant. When he got there, he called in to the CHP. Turns out a couple of Achippas pulled a guy over, who then proceeded to shoot and kill the officers. My dad rolled up on scene just after it went down. You can look it up on the CHP website. December 22, 1978. My personal story isn't as scary, really. I work for DOT and was operating a plow truck on a little mountain highway clearing mud and rock slides during heavy rains. I had been at it for about 10 hours when I had to just stand up and stretch a bit. I stop in the middle of the road with all my strobes and lights going and stand on the running board of the truck. A few seconds later I heard rocks and pebbles rolling down the mountainside, so I got back into the truck. As soon as I closed the door, a boulder the same size as my dump truck lands on the road right in front of my plow. If I had been a few feet further forward, it would have killed me. Not a truck driver, but a first-hand experience in Dallas, Texas. I worked for a non-profit that was trying to help another non-profit on a project helping to get prostitutes into rehab and job training. We partnered with the FBI, local police, district attorney, public defenders, and a local hospital. It was an incredible program that chose to see prostitutes as victims instead of perpetrators. As I was getting my organization ready to get involved, I ended up spending time with the FBI agent who started the program. I asked him how the FBI got involved. He explained that after September 11, the FBI was tasked with figuring out how Al-Qaeda would attack interior cities like Dallas. They determined that they may pull a Timothy McVeigh and load a semi-truck full of explosive materials, drive them into a city, and detonate. So, they decided to start monitoring the truck stops where the terrorists would stage the attack. They monitored for months and, of course, found that Al-Qaeda was nowhere to be seen in American truck stops. Rather, they found that the truck stops were filled with really screwed up activity, including drugs, prostitution, human trafficking, etc. He explained that while the vast majority of truck drivers are good people trying to make a living, that the nature of the trucking industry with self-employed operators created an environment open to many ex-convicts who couldn't get other employment because of the check-the-box hiring policies. So, ex-convicts often bought trucks, worked for themselves, and were hired by companies to drive their freight, which eliminated the many of the company's liabilities had the former convicts worked for the companies themselves. Long story short, he detailed the crimes, including the fact that the FBI was tracking many unsolved murders and serial murderers, human trafficking rings, etc. The more I learned about truck stops, the scarier they became. I ended up going on multiple law enforcement rides as part of the program. Let me say this: truck stop prostitutes are in terrible, terrible shape. Think about what must have gone on for them that they are hanging out at a truck stop turning $10 to $20 tricks. It's awful. I saw horrible things, including child trafficking and prostitution. The things I saw still make me sick to my stomach. To this day, when driving across the country, I will gladly skip the truck stops and go to a smaller gas station. I'm forever creeped out by what I have seen. My uncle used to drive a truck from Northern Europe down to Iraq in the 80s when the Saddam regime was trying to modernize the country and spending a lot of money importing industrial equipment and foreign experts. Driving down to Iraq meant going through Turkey because going through the Soviet Union was obviously not an option. Taking the Turkish route was ridiculously dangerous because at the time Turkey had no social safety nets and they just experienced some kind of economic collapse which left millions of people unemployed, homeless, and destitute. In certain regions of Turkey, these desperate and starving people set up huge tent cities and shanty towns along the roads hoping that some kind of opportunity passing along the road would provide them with some kind of wealth or at least a meal. But being desperate, they would often resort to banditry in an attempt to get some cash. One of their favorite methods was stopping foreign trucks, killing the drivers, and just stealing everything. They do anything and everything to stop these trucks, then just descend on them like a swarm of ants attacking a larger animal. The most common method was bandits placing large objects in the middle of the road. Foreign drivers were instructed to never stop, just ram their way through obstacles. When the bandits realized this, they started kidnapping children and shoving them in front of trucks to make the drivers stop. Again, foreign drivers were instructed to just floor it and keep going because if they stopped they'd almost certainly be murdered. Another common issue was police corruption. The Turkish police would often stop foreign truck drivers and just rob them at gunpoint because the police officers knew that drivers carried substantial amounts of cash to pay for food, fuel, etc. Other times the police would make truck drivers follow them to secluded areas where they'd murder the truckers and steal the truck. Another thing they'd do is kidnap foreign drivers by arresting them on made-up charges and demanding massive amounts of money to free them from jail. So, haulage contractors instructed their drivers to never stop for the Turkish police and to ram police cars if necessary. My uncle said he had to ram his way through obstacles on the road a few times, but he refuses to talk about whether or not any of those obstacles were alive or not. I'm fairly sure he got PTSD from this, but he'd never admit to it. Not a trucker, but a spooky driving experience less. This happened some 15 years ago as I was driving back up north from Newbury in the UK. Now I don't do anywhere near as much driving as you Americans, but for late night trips I always operate a buddy system just in case. My friend had taken his rest and woke up about 45 minutes before time to set off. I checked the weather forecast, heavy fog due across the M1 at around 2 a.m., just as I would be hitting that part of the route. Oh no, I asked my friend if we could set off half an hour earlier to skip it, he agreed, and we set off. We're having an enjoyable time thanks to the lack of traffic, but I can see a fog line appearing. It gets thick, fast. I take a look at the clock, 1:30 a.m. The weather forecasters got it wrong again, I think to myself. I ask my friend to stay alert in case I miss something as I'll be concentrating dead ahead. I have to slow to about 35 to 40 miles per hour, from 70, because visibility is basically zero, but stopping the car would be suicide if there's anything behind me. Based on my position I know there's a service station in about 15 miles, so I'll turn it off there and wait for it out. The fog starts getting really thick to the point where I'm thinking maybe it's actually safer to stop. I can't see the road or the cat's eyes at this point. I pull to the left slowly and wait for the telltale feel of the hard shoulders rumble strip. It didn't come. Nor has the car hit a ditch. At this point I'm a bit freaked out as I have no orientation and I can't see the road. I'm down to about 15 miles per hour now as my friend says, "Hey, there's a light in front of us." It's a green light, which is odd for the motorway, but maybe I can see what's going on from there. I pick up a little speed and head towards the green light. As I'm driving forward the fog begins to lift, and I realize where we are. At the intersection of Beverly Road and the A63. The green light was a traffic light. I pulled the car over and we both said to each other, "What?" This is approximately 150 miles from where the fog started. A good 2.5 hours drive away. I look at my watch, 1:50 a.m. I take a look at the radio clock in the car, 4 a.m. I got my phone out, my friend got his phone out. Both say 1:50 a.m. As I look in the rear view, there's not a trace of fog behind me. Both of us are quite freaked out at this point, so we decided to find out which clock is right. I drive to the station. 4:07 a.m. To this day, I have no explanation and neither of us can account for the missing 2.5 hours, not how I managed to do multiple lane changes and junctions to get from the M1 to the M62 and then the A63. Not me, not yet thank God, but my dad. When I was about to start driving, we sat one night and drank a bottle of whiskey together. He started telling me all kinds of stories from his 30-plus year career. The one that still gets me is when he was driving in Kansas/Colorado one night. He said he was driving on a 2-lane highway, about 2 or 3 in the morning. And he was half asleep. This was back in the day when you drove until you got tired, no matter how long it was, clear night, full moon, you could drive with the headlights off kind of night. Also, in eastern Colorado/western Kansas, it's so flat you could watch your dog run away for 2 weeks. Well, he's going around this curve, and sees a man just standing in the middle of the road. He had on dripping wet and muddy clothes and was standing in my dad's lane with his arms out. Like he was waiting for my dad to run him over. My dad said he barely missed the man, almost turned his truck over, and somehow got it right. Never stopped. My dad says he still has nightmares about it and is always scared to drive at night because of that. He also says he doesn't even know if it was real or not, because he hadn't slept in more than 24 hours, but he's fairly sure it was real. So, I am an over-the-road truck driver in America. I generally stay in the Midwest as I enjoy the open road and less traveled areas. I tend to drive at night because the roads are a lot emptier and there tends to be less traffic/construction going on around that time. Around this particular night I was in Kansas making my way to Wyoming. I drive for hours at a time nonstop, so before my drive I stack up on food and drinks. I've accustomed my bladder to holding going to the bathroom after years of truck driving until I can't hold it anymore. Now in Nebraska, I get the urge to pass, so I start finding a part of the road that I'm able to pull over safely without damaging my tires. But this is the backwoods of the country, so finding this would be a little hard, but not impossible. When I finally feel that I have found a perfect enough location I pull over. Since I'm in the middle of nowhere I have nowhere to pass besides an empty gallon that contains water because there's no way I'm stepping outside in the dead of night. As I'm doing my business, I hear a tap. I do want to make it known that I travel in my truck alone. I don't have a partner on the truck nor a pet of any kind. The truck radio is off, the windows are up and all you can hear from my perspective is the hum of the truck running. I begin to look for the sound, which at first I thought was my mini fridge, because when it gets unplugged the melted water from the freezer will leak out and start to make a patter noise on the floor. I checked and it wasn't that, and on realizing this I noticed the tap sounded more like a small rock hitting the side of the truck, the driver's side in particular. Within my truck I start to look outside of the driver's window but don't find anything in particular, so I start to look out of all the windows. I don't see anything anywhere, so I start to think it could be the truck itself. I get back in the driver's seat to get out of the truck to look under the hood. As I'm about to step out, another small rock hits my door. And I look out into the side of the road where in the field stand these tall cornstalks. Keep in mind cornstalks are tall, I'm standing on the top step of my truck, and I can see right above them. And in looking out into the darkness I see the top of someone's head, just the top, not even a forehead, just their hair, which was black. The average height of a cornstalk is 8 feet, so I don't know about you, but whoever that was had an advantage. I get back in the truck and lock the doors, put the window down a tad bit and yell, "Hey, you need help?" No answer. "Hey man, you good?" No answer, so I say put the truck in gear and haul ass. I don't even look back, just try to get away from them and the area as fast as the truck will go after being at a standstill on the side of the road. I drive for hours until I reach Wyoming and pull over at a truck stop to get some sleep. Before heading to sleep I go inside the truck stop to get some food, and as I'm coming back to my truck I see marks on the back of the passenger side of the truck as if someone had keyed my truck. I start angrily looking around to see who it could have been, but can't really come to a conclusion since most of the other drivers weren't in their front seat. Then, I start looking around my entire cab and notice the marks are also on the back of the cab near the platform where the cab and trailer connect. I started remembering about the person I saw in the field and thought it was them, but I don't remember feeling anyone hop on back there, so I was left puzzled. Nothing else happened for the rest of the day thankfully, so I'm not sure who that person was or what they wanted or what their intentions were, and I'm glad I never ended up finding out. Obligatory, this is my dad's story, who's been a trucker for over 50 years. He tells us of these experiences when we ask otherwise. He doesn't really speak of them. One night he was doing a long run. He knew he wouldn't make it home that night, so when he saw an old-looking pub up ahead, Ireland, he decided to park up for the night about 1:30 a.m. and get himself a nice pint. He went into the bar and thought everyone was dressed really old-fashioned and dancing. He thought nothing of it and got himself a Guinness. He still says to this day it was the nicest pint he's ever had in his entire life. After he finished his pint, faces started to get fuzzy. He said it was like they were going out of focus. So, he got back in the cab, pulled his curtains and done his crosswords until he fell asleep. The next morning when he woke up he was going to get some breakfast and a coffee from the pub before he started driving again. He pulled his curtains and saw the pub from last night was derelict and boarded up, untouched for many years. He has no explanation for it, but he knows it wasn't a dream. My dad has many experiences like this one. If anyone wants to hear them, just let me know. I'm a trucker, and the creepiest thing to happen to me was a guy at the side of the road waiting until I was really close and ran out in front of me and stopped in the middle of the lane expecting to get run over. Luckily, I didn't have a load on and had fast reflexes and swerved around him, barely missing him by inches. I looked in my mirror and the traffic behind me was dodging him as well. He was definitely trying hard to die that day. I reported him to the police, but didn't hear anything come of him. Not a trucker, but this happened on a road trip with my ex-GF, and I've always wanted to tell this story. We were headed to Eureka, California from Oregon, and had to go on Highway 299. We had a late start to our day, so it was nighttime by the time we set out on 299, thinking it would be just a normal stretch of rainy highway. We were thoroughly unprepared for how twisty and isolated it was. Midnight came and it had been pouring rain. GF was dodging rockfall for the entire drive so far. She was absolutely drained. We found a flat place to pull over for a quick nap, like a little outcrop of dirt alongside the road. The rain had stopped, but it was muddy, and man was it quiet. Eerily so. We were both so drained we just crashed for about 30 minutes or so in our respective seats. Keep in mind, we'd been on the road for a while and hadn't passed a single car the entire time. I woke up to the sound of scratching underneath the car that I brushed off like an animal. Then I heard steady plopping out in the mud, like someone was circling our car, but didn't see a thing. I elbowed my girl thinking she was still asleep, but she was fully awake and frozen in place and just said I know. She said she had this feeling that something was off from the second we pulled into that spot. We held deathly still for a bit longer, still reckoning it was a deer or something in denial. I got a literal wave of goosebumps when we heard that faint scratching starts up yet again. This time we bolted into action, and she threw the car into reverse pretty quickly. Suddenly she screamed, "There's someone there." Oh my God, as she saw a figure dive into a nearby bush, lit up from the reverse lights. I looked, but didn't see anything. We both were in 100% panic mode and practically skidded back onto the road. The rest of the drive back into CA was unremarkable, but we did have a motorcycle tail us for most of the way back after that. From a decent distance, luckily. But seeing that faint light bobbing far behind us gave us the creeps on top of everything. Probably unrelated, but who knows? Everything felt creepy and wrong for the rest of the night. Be careful on Highway 299 in Oregon, guys. I used to do music back in the 80s and 90s as part of the sound and setup crew. This entailed many late-night drives in the equipment truck through some very isolated sections of our state after the show to get home. One night me and my friend were driving through a dark, desolate, swampy area on a 2-lane highway around 2 in the morning. Out of nowhere, we noticed a car that had driven off the road and into the woods. All that was visible were headlights shining on trees and red taillights. Not really knowing what to do, we drove past, but then realized that the car in the woods could have been the result of an accident of some sort, so we were compelled to turn around to check it out in case someone needed help. This situation really creeped me out since I knew I could potentially witness some sort of gruesome accident, and I remember forcing myself out of the truck to reluctantly inspect the situation. Upon arriving where the car was, I walked into the woods to the scene. The car door was open and the key alarm beeping. Ding, ding, ding. The headlights are still on, but no one is to be seen anywhere. No blood, broken glass. My only guess is the car belonged to a drunk driver who drove off the road into the woods and left the scene. I still wonder what happened there that night, but can only assume it was just an abandoned car after the driver had too much fun. Not a truck driver, but years ago I was driving with my ex-girlfriend back from a wedding in northern Wisconsin heading towards Madison where she lived. We were probably like 20 or 30 miles away from the city at that point, and it was probably around 1 a.m. My GPS, which was some really cheap brand that my dad got me as a gift from Radio Shack, had me going through some backcountry highways for some reason after I had stopped for gas instead of getting me back on the expressway right away. I didn't mind, I kind of always found those really peaceful, even though at night they are pretty creepy. My girlfriend was asleep in the passenger's seat, so I had turned down the music really quietly to not wake her, which added a bit to the eeriness of it all. I'm really into this groove of driving, focused on the roads because it was so dark without street lights everywhere. Then, something on the side of the road catches my eye. It was a giant mountain lion, with what appeared to be blood all over its face. I started shaking my girlfriend awake to get her to see it before it was gone, but she woke up too late. I pulled over to the side of the road and asked her to watch the rear view so she could see this huge thing cross the road, but it never did. She was convinced that I imagined it all because that area of Wisconsin is not known for mountain lions, but I swear I saw it. Technically I was driving a pickup truck at the time, but whatever. At the time I was working IT for a 3-letter formerly great tech company doing retail point-of-sale upgrades. One of the techs that had been on an overnight job had gotten suddenly sick and they needed an extra hand in the middle of the night, and I like money, so I went out there in the middle of the night to a site maybe 70 miles away. It was 1 to 2 a.m. and I'm going down roads I wasn't familiar with. Right before I go around a bend on an empty 2-lane highway with of course no streetlights, and road cones are sort of haphazardly set up to start to block off the left lane. I'm on the right so I don't mind, but it was weird that there were no warning signs or anything, and then what seemed like a quarter mile down the road, there was a car just stopped in the right lane that I was in. I slowed down and nearly at a stop cause I'm a dumb teenager who didn't realize what this was, and out of the car step out 2 dudes and started walking towards my truck. Well, I start to nope right out of there and run over a cone to get away. One man tried to jump in front, but I got around him and sped off down the road. The traffic cones had stopped right where the stopped car was. I'm already a very anxious person, so after the panic and adrenaline wore off a few miles down the road, I called the police officers to report what happened. Headlights appeared on the horizon behind me, which caused me to panic even more. I told the 911 dispatcher that I thought I was being followed, and I pulled off at the next exit because it had a gas station. I pulled off and the car behind did too. My heart was slamming in my chest as I pulled up the pump and sprinted into the store, only to find that the car that had pulled in behind me was a completely different car than the one that was stopped in the road, and had a small woman driving it who had gotten out to pump her gas, instead of the two dudes who had jumped out of their car. After I had collected myself and told the dispatcher it was someone else, I went out to ask her if she had seen the car stopped on the road after the cones. The lady pumping her gas says she had seen the cones, but there was no car stopped on the road when she had passed by. 15 minutes later, a police officer came by the gas station to take my statement about it and said that they had gotten a similar report a couple of weeks prior, but that was about it. Never heard back about if the police officers found anything or not. This one happened when I was hauling freight from New York to Nevada. I worked for a company that has many acronyms, and all of them are bad. The company was fairly good, but never home. I always passed this ghost town on the border of New Mexico and Texas. Every time I passed through it, I got chills. I swore to never stop in that town because the closest town was a good 50 miles away, if not more. Unfortunately, I was unlucky as my hours for that day had me stuck right in the center of that town. I pulled into the 70s era gas station and walked around. I thank God that I had my Maglite, on steroids, flashlight, as it made everything bright as day. I didn't find anything but boarded up windows and a swinging door to a hole in the ground toilet. I finished my business and thanked God that I didn't need to sit down. I did my walk around and checked everything we were supposed to. A truck in tip-top shape is a truck you will never be stranded in the middle of nowhere. I did this 3 times as my standard custom because I was a nervous Nelly. I got into my truck and checked everything inside and made sure no hitchhikers came. Then closed all of my curtains to wind down after it locked everything. I wasn't moving and my freight wasn't going to be disturbed out here. After getting about 3 hours of sleep, I woke up knocking. I was slow to it until I heard BAM. 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 On my driver's side door. I rushed to the driver's side and turned my flashlight down. No one was there and no footsteps. I thought that was odd and opened the door. Looked around all over the place and saw nothing. Got out, grabbed my keys, and locked the door. Walked around the entire rig and noticed I only saw my shoe prints. I checked on everything and nothing was wrong. I did one more pass before I heard a BAM. 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 On the passenger side this time. I ran over there quickly to see nothing there. I sighed to myself and prayed as I did another pass around the ring. Maybe someone was pulling a prank and being a jerk. I didn't see anyone at all and started to panic a little. If they climbed on my rig. I climbed into the truck after unlocking it. I said a prayer and went to bed. The next morning, I did my morning pass and noticed what looked to be animal tracks. I shrugged it off as another animal idiot. I said a prayer of thanks after I finished checking and swore to end my day early if I'm not halfway through my hours for that day. If I pass through that town again. I don't do trucking anymore after several problems and now work as a caregiver for my grandfather. My dad is a long-haul trucker. His creepy/scary story is about how he had to stay overnight at a location, pretty common for him. But he was hauling electronics, and in order for him to stay he had to park in their secure parking lot. It was near Detroit, right in the light of the recession, so things are really bad. The lot was super secure, wire fences, armed guards, massive floodlights. He said the thing that freaked him out was that he was told, and guided to park right against a wall. He was allowed out briefly to use the washroom and get water. Otherwise, he was to back in such a way that his cab doors were stuck between 2 poles so they couldn't open, windows could though, and that his trailer doors were pressed to the wall. Their last words before he was trapped in the truck all night were keep your curtains closed, ignore any shaking or movement of the truck during the night, ignore any gunshots you may hear. Do not exit the truck unless there is a severe medical emergency. If needs something he is to radio on his CB, otherwise keep the radio off. Freaked him out that they needed that much security. This was in Michigan around the recession. My dad is not a trucker, but he used to take me with him to go to various cities and provinces to deliver some packages. I remember this creepy night since it happened when I was a teenager. We were driving across a highway at nighttime, maybe around 9 p.m. We were talking, laughing, and I was joking with him, and all of a sudden he slammed his brakes on, and I almost hit the windscreen. I was like, "Dad, what's wrong?" Turned around, his face was so pale, and he said, "I hit a girl, did you see that?" "I hit her." And he was about to open the door and walk to the front car to check it out, but I told him I didn't see any girl, and he stopped opening the door. He tried to look outside, but everything was dark and all I could see was the empty road. There was no blood, no dead body, nothing. The beam range from the car was bright enough to see 45 meters ahead. When he calmed down, he didn't say a thing and kept driving. I didn't say a single word as well because the atmosphere was really weird and creepy. When we reached the destination, my dad asked me again, "You didn't see that girl? The girl with long, black hair and dressed in white?" At this time, I looked at my dad, didn't say a word, and shook my head. My dad never mentioned that story anymore, not to anyone in the family. And for some reason, I didn't even tell that story to my siblings as well. Not my story, but my father-in-law was a bus driver in Mexico for 25 years. One of his many stories was one time him and my mother-in-law, who would tag along for the ride sometimes, were coming back to Mexico City from somewhere in the north. The bus was pretty empty except for a few passengers, and a common thing to do there if your bus was empty was to pick up people that needed a lift in the small towns you pass through to make a couple bucks. They were going through a small town at night and seeing a large group of people waiting by a bus stop. My father-in-law decides to stop and pick up these people. They all get on and sit quietly and do nothing out of the ordinary. They got going and didn't pay attention to the people as my father-in-law was concentrating on driving and my mother-in-law was in the front seat and fell asleep. Finally reached their destination. When me in-laws finally looked back and expected to see the passengers they picked up, there was no one. Only a few actual passengers. My mother-in-law frantically asked one of the passengers what happened to all the people. And the passenger replied, "What people?" The driver stopped in the town at that stop and opened the doors, but no one came on. Edit: they were going from Aguas Calientes to Zacatecas. Not a truck driver, but I was a taxi driver in Georgia, and one time I got a call about a $80 round trip to the outskirts of town. The GPS said 30 minutes, but for some reason it ended up taking me an hour and a half. It was the last call of the day and I had just started a week ago and I wanted to make an impression, so I took the call and picked up 3 ladies all dressed like hookers to someone's house where we picked up 3 more apparently hookers, and the whole way they were quiet as hell. It made me nervous. Anyway, we were on our way to the location when I started running out of gasoline. I put in the GPS to a gas station 3 times, all of them were closed. The closer we got to the location, the less and less there were street lights and gas stations and stores and more dirt roads and forest. Eventually I had to ask them where we were going. And they said, "Just go, we'll pay you," and I thought, as far as we've been and as far as we're going, you better pay me, Goldsmith. Someone's better pay me, or heads are going to roll. We went down a dirt road on a mountain for what seemed like 20 minutes and found one lone trailer in the middle of a farm surrounded by forest where my signal didn't even catch. The ladies all went inside to fetch me the cash and I hung out in my van for like 30 minutes as they all came in, came out, came in, argued about who's going to pay me. Eventually one butch-looking scary lady walked up and handed me $180. All she said was, "Now go away," and I said, "Yes, ma'am." I wasn't about to argue about whatever was going on, so I left, and getting back was a tough time. I took so many wrong turns I ended up in Dahlonega, but I found a gas station just as my car decided to die. I had to push it into the racetrack and was able to find an old dusty map and charge my phone to figure out where I needed to go get out of this podunk town. I quit taxi the next week. Too many weirdos in this business. I was driving my pickup truck in Calaveras County on a small mountain road near Mokelumne Hill. It was about 10 p.m. and as dark as it got. The moon was out that evening, but because this area of NorCal is covered with 200-foot-plus pine trees and redwoods, none of that moonlight reached the forest floor, so it might as well have been pitch black. I had my 5-year-old, 85 lb Bluenose Pitbull sitting passenger with me. It was a very warm night, about mid-80 degrees, so I had all my windows down. As we began turning off of this single-lane paved road onto a gravel road, I noticed a large amount of broken glass across the road, nothing out of the usual. Lots of people tend to drink and drive on these back roads and toss their bottles out as they please. I get out and I'm about 10 in front of my truck, in the headlights and picking up glass when I hear my dog start to low growl. Since the windows were rolled down, I got up to go see what she was growling at because I didn't want her jumping out and running off into the night. As I lean into the driver's side and address my dog, I see she's staring directly in front of the truck where I was just standing, and there's a fully mature, roughly 150 pounds, mountain lion slowly walking out of the underbrush on the side of the road less than 6 from where I was just crouching down picking up glass. I immediately hopped in the cab and slammed my door closed. At this point, the cat is maybe 5 foot in front of my truck when I blare the horn. This cat literally answers back with a blood-curdling scream. If you've never heard a mountain lion scream like a human woman in distress, watch this. At this point I had never known that mountain lions were capable of such noises and literally almost pissed myself while trying to get my truck into gear and flooring it out of there. My home was only about 20 minutes, 12 miles, from where this happened. I didn't realize until getting home that my hat had fallen off in the process of me peeling out and getting away from the cat. Never thought much of it, but over the next month or so I had multiple instances of leaving a tool out on the ground and the next morning there being mountain lion scat all over it, etc., etc. I began setting up game cameras all around my 40-acre property. Sure, the same cat had been, for lack of better words, stalking the areas I worked in during the evening hours. Here is a photo of it walking the same path I used to get to my well. After talking with a local fish and wildlife ranger about the whole story, he mentioned that even though lions generally roam a huge swath of area, he wouldn't be surprised if the cat picked up my smell from my hat and followed me to my property that night. If I didn't have my dog with me that evening, I have no doubt that I would have been mountain lion food, and the only sign anybody would have had of my disappearance would be my truck left in the road. Not a trucker, but I have some bizarre stories working in Thailand. I was driving across the country with my wife and 2 little kids through the night. We got into a crazy monsoon storm in the mountains of Nam Nao National Park, and there had been zero traffic forever. All of a sudden we saw a giant tree that had fallen across the road. We had just passed a dangerous area where water had been pouring off of a cliff like a waterfall and thought the highway might wash out, so we were kind of trapped. We decided to just wait out the rain before turning around. But it was pretty scary considering how hard it was raining. The tree could have hit our car, and we were aware the park has wild elephants, bears, and leopards. Not that animals would be out in a driving rainstorm attacking a car, but you know, stuff you think about in the dark. Eventually a huge dump truck pulls up behind us and 4 guys hop out with no shirts on and carrying machetes. My wife thought we were goners, but they walked past our car and started hacking away at a tree that I would guess was 4 to 6 feet thick. Soon another huge dump truck came from the other direction and more men jumped out with machetes. Soon there were 8 topless guys taking turns just hacking away at this massive tree in a driving rainstorm. After about 30 minutes they cut through it, and almost on cue, the rain stopped. They shoved part of the tree out of the way, waved us through, and we finished the rest of the drive without incident. I now carry a machete in my car, and I can't wait for the day I can rip my shirt off and clear the road for someone else. About 4 years ago now, I was driving on a 2-lane highway somewhere in Illinois around 2 or 3 in the morning. I saw a dead deer in the road, so I slowed down and got in the other lane to pass it since there was no oncoming traffic, and as I passed it I noticed it hadn't been run over. Its head had been cut off with surgical precision, and it had been gutted, its organs spread out all around it on the road in some kind of weird pattern. Now, at this point, I had slowed to maybe 5 to 10 miles per hour to look at this dead deer, just going what over and over as I tried to comprehend what I was seeing, when movement in the tree leaned, just in view of my headlights, caught my eye. There were people in the trees. And one of them was getting closer to my cab, and I hit the gas. They seemed to be wearing robes, and I didn't really get a good look at any of them, but I shuddered to think what might have happened if I'd been in a normal car and not an 18-wheeler. It was about 2 a.m. passing through rural Texas making a heavy machinery delivery. The route I was taking to this farm was through rural Texas, you know the type you see in movies that involve a farm in the middle of nowhere type stuff, a house every 2 miles type deal. And little did I know this route I was going to take was about to lead to the scariest/freakiest experience I've ever had. Easily, period. I have LED light bars on my truck all over the front, so when there's no oncoming traffic I can see for literally a mile. So, I'm driving down the road minding my own business when I can see something off in the far distance with my lights, and the closer and closer I get, it looks increasingly like a person. About 200 yards from what appears to be a person, I can make out that it's a girl because of the long hair and light-colored clothes she had on. So, I slow down so as not to scare this girl walking in the road and turn my brights off, so I don't blind her. Truck lights are bright enough as is, so I could see her simply fine without at this point. As I got closer, she turned. And when she did, my CB radio started making some slight static, and as I passed by I swear she had absolutely no face. At all. It looked like a hollow shell. I'm getting anxious just typing this out, and you'll see why in the next paragraph. I've never flown through gears so fast in my entire life, especially with a heavy load, and I had to be doing at least 70 before I finally came back to my senses. I called the police about it, and the worst part was they said I'm not the first person to call this in. Through the years they've had people call it in with similar descriptions of a girl walking down the road in the early morning hours, and when she turns she has a hollowed-out face. The sheriff I talked to told me about an accident that happened years back. A girl in her 20s was struck and killed by a truck speeding down that road in the early morning hours, and it dragged her so far down the road, it ground her face down to nothing on the asphalt. And she was described as having long hair and wearing light-colored clothes. The exact same description as I saw that night. Needless to say, I will never be taking that route again if I have another delivery. Ever. I was running through California one night, SR 58 to be exact, Tehachapi, and started to get sleepy. I pulled out on the side of the road and decided to take a nap. The load I was picking up got rescheduled, and so I decided to just hang out where I was out until it was closer to my normal driving time, which was at night. I was starting to learn how to do astrophotography, and where I was parked was a pretty decent spot. Nice and dark, not a lot of traffic at night, so I decided I would try and practice some shots. I climbed up onto the top of my trailer, just above my reefer unit on the edge, and sat there learning how to do aperture settings and all that. All of a sudden, I hear a noise coming from the brush directly below me. I felt pretty safe in the knowledge that no animal was climbing up 13 feet 6 inches high of a trailer. I picked up my flashlight and started looking around the ground for the sound, but to my surprise, I found absolutely nothing. So, I wrote it off to wind and went back to figuring out camera settings. About 2 minutes later, I heard it again, this time a little further down my trailer, so I shined my flashlight out there again. Yet again, nothing. Just brush. By this time, I was starting to get concerned about what I was hearing. The sound I was hearing didn't sound like a small animal, but more like someone moving around below me. The passenger door to my truck was locked, but I left the driver door unlocked, and since I was sitting close to that side of the trailer, I could see if anyone was going to approach it. I turned my light off and go back to what I was doing. About 5 minutes later I heard someone say hey. My heart jumped into my throat. I grab my light, stand up on the trailer, and start frantically looking around the edge of the truck. Not a good thing. Nothing. Same as it was before when I searched around with my light. I remain as quiet as possible, still looking around the brush with my light. Whoever was out there, I didn't want them to hear how panicked I was. It felt like time was standing still in this instance because it was a pitch blackout and no car, or truck, has passed me in over an hour. Roughly a minute had gone by, and I heard my trailer door handle unlock and release. Now, thankfully I was empty so there was no load for anyone to steal. But they didn't open the door. Whoever it was, unlocked the trailer door and stopped, as if to draw me to the back of the trailer. I had no time to think about what I was going to do. I snapped out of my panic freeze, jumped down to the catwalk, walkway on the back of the cab of the truck, and hit the ground as fast as possible. I jumped in the truck and locked the door, fired up the truck and took off as fast as I could. I drove for about 5 minutes, rarely taking my eyes off my side mirror to see if I was being followed. I felt like it was safe enough for me to pull off and close the door of the trailer. At this point I'm trembling because of the pure adrenaline running through me. I stopped that truck as fast as I could, bolted to the back, shut the trailer door, and locked it. Got back in the truck and left that area as fast as I could. To this day, I still don't know what this person was doing or what their endgame was. I never stopped on Tehachapi again after that. Gave up trying to learn astrophotography too. One time I was driving a big truck full of mailers to NYC from Atlanta in February. In the middle of the night, like 2 a.m., we are in the middle of nowhere, we are cruising, and my girlfriend/passenger suddenly sits up straight with a pull over now. So, I'm like, what? She's like, now, pull over right now, so I do. We sit there for a few minutes and I'm all WTF, and she's like, I don't know, okay whatever, let's just keep going. It was a feeling and intuition. So, we pulled back on the highway, crest the next hill, and before us is a huge accident with wheels still spinning on turned over cars, smoke fire. It just happened, no police officers yet. We would have been in that mini car wreck for certain if we hadn't pulled off. Lesson, always trust your girl's intuition. Okay, here goes. While in high school I used to hang out every Friday night a couple of towns away with two friends. This was upstate New York in the mid-90s. The drive home was about 45 minutes up and through the mountains. There was one patch of road that had no houses or streetlights for about 5 to 10 minutes straight, and always freaked me out a little seeing how dark it was. One night while I was driving this patch of road, my very worst fear occurred. The headlights from my car started to dim. Then I noticed not only the rest of the lights in the car dashboard starting to dim, but the entire car seemed to be running out of energy altogether. Before I knew it, the car started stalling and I had to pull over. I remember yelling, "No, please, no." I was freaking out because this is how every alien abduction tale begins. When I finally stopped, it was pitch black. There was no light whatsoever except for the glare of the moon. I may not have been more scared in all my life. I gave it less than a minute and I just kept trying to turn the car back on by twisting the key. It worked like a charm and the car fully came back on and I was able to get the hell out of there. Never found out why it happened to begin with. Story 2, yet another Friday along the same patch of lightless road. This time as I was driving I looked up into the sky to my right and saw something large, but far away, falling out of the sky completely engulfed in fire. I've never seen anything like it, and especially the trail of fire. It was a literal fireball. I watched as it passed the mountains and disappeared. It being after midnight and desolate out, I imagined I must have just seen a UFO crash. The next day I learned that pieces of the Russian space station were said to be falling to Earth after it lost orbit and it was abandoned. This did not happen to me. And it's not about trucks, but I thought it would be nice to share it on a creepy story thread. My uncle wanted to go to some town for business with a friend. It was urgent work, so my uncle searched desperately for any available cab. It was late evening, so there were scarcely any, and almost all of them were reserved. Finally, he managed to find one. However, when my uncle mentioned the destination, the cab driver straight up refused to go, because the route to that town was said to be bad, as in haunted bad. On top of that, it was drizzling, and visibility was quite bad. Anyway, after much insistence, and an offer to pay thrice the fare, the driver relented. Soon, they were halfway there. The ride was going well when suddenly the driver pulled up in front of a bridge. My uncle asked the driver what was going on when he asked him to be quiet. A car appeared, its two headlights shining through the fog, and it stopped a few meters away. Then the car door opened, and a man stepped out, and walked to the edge of the bridge. He took out a cigarette and started smoking and stood there by the railing for a few minutes. Then, he got back inside his car. And then, it happened. My uncle and his friend had no idea about what was going to happen. After the man got inside his car, there was a brilliant flash, and my uncle had to cover his eyes for what felt like a long time. When he opened them, he saw the car in front of them up in flames. It had been struck by lightning, and they could hear the man inside screaming while being burnt alive. Just as my uncle tried to open the door to help the man out, the driver commanded him to sit still and not move. And he did the same because the driver seemed to know what he was doing. And then, the car rolled along, on its own, back down the path it came from, and disappeared from view. After it was over, the driver explained to them that this was a common sighting, and that's why he stopped the car in front of the bridge. The man was on his way somewhere and had pulled up on the bridge to smoke a little. But when he got back in his car, lightning struck and killed him right there and then. He said that what they saw was actually the ghost replaying his death to the spectators. Yes, I know it's long. Sorry if I sound redundant. I tagged along with my grandpa in his truck since I was able to go to the bathroom on my own, say about the age of 5. When school started, I left with him every break we had. Then most over all of Europe before I turned 12. Once in Austria in the summer, we were driving on a smaller highway and Grandpa really needed to take a shot in the middle of nowhere, so we pulled over on the shoulder and he grabbed some paper and his flashlight and went around the front of the truck to the ditch. I rolled down my window as I waited in the cabin. After max 1 minute I heard my grandpa shouting in despair, "Open the door, boy." I see him running along the positioning lights alongside the trailer towards my door, pants along his knees. I popped the door wide open, and he flew up the steps into my seat screaming words I'd never heard before, and he taught me a lot of harsh words along the road. He slams the door and says look outside. As I heard crazy commotion outside, he shined the ground outside and there outside were two absolutely mental wild boars headbutting and fighting the lower parts of our truck. My grandpa caught his breath and explained as he pulled his pants down a car passed and he saw a body with a leather suit and MC helmet laying in the ditch some 5 meters away. He shined his light and it seemed to be moving. A split second later a boar looked out from inside the leather jacket covered in blood and mess. The second one must have been close by. Experienced as he was, he just ran for the truck without even pulling his pants up. We notified the local authorities and then drove off to the first truck stop way down that road. Grandpa's need for going to the restroom didn't seem that important anymore. We were scared, but boy did we say that story to everyone we ever meet on the road. I am here for the underground highway stories. I can elaborate more of what I have heard throughout the years after I sleep if anyone cares. Edit for story time, and sorry it took so long. Okay, so for anyone who has followed me for a while, they know I spent 10 plus in the military and have been a tattoo artist for 11 years now. Been to Japan, they have a version of Bigfoot, to Afghanistan, also Bigfoot, Kuwait, Bigfoot, and others. In my travels I have met and tattooed well over 6,000 people, and for anyone who doesn't get tattooed, it is kind of like therapy. People get them for all varied reasons, but the common theme is that people like to talk. I try to have friendly conversation with all my clients, but if anything sounds too crazy, I tend to just nod my head and carry on with the tattoo. Now that the basics are covered, I will never forget these 5 particular clients I had while tattooing in southern Arizona. 2 truckers and 3 welders to tie in 2 ridiculous sounding conspiracy theories that I may or may not fully believe, but these got me listening. Starting with the welders, on 3 separate occasions I tattooed union types who claimed to be on a massive government contract, whose sole purpose was welding shackles into cattle cars. I tattooed them for about 6 months, and they showed me pictures and video, said that for 10 hours a day they fitted cattle cars with chains and shackles. That was nearly a decade ago, so take it as you will. No one has been rounded up yet. The most fascinating 2 clients, with the coolest stories though, were these 2 truckers. Tattooed them every time they were in town. The first, let's call him Jim, said he worked for a government-contracted shipping company and all his work entailed was driving cargo into the mountains, driving past military checkpoints, into a circular door cut into the mountain, and dropping the cargo off into a staging area tall enough to park a small skyscraper. Jim said he saw huge tunnels leading off of this chamber, and trucks coming and going with cargo, but his clearance led him into the staging area to unload and then leave, no more. So, needless to say, I was skeptical. Like, yes, I worked for the alphabet soup and know all about some of the mountain retreats and missile silos, but really, underground highways? Staging areas you can walk a mecha through? Quit pulling my chain. That was until about 2 to 3 months later when I met Bill. Bill said he was a trucker, and when I asked what he carried he said all the secret cargo. I asked him, so like all the covered stuff you see on the highway? And his reply was just, no, the stuff too dangerous or off the books that you never see it on the highway. Since the thoughts of Jim's stories were still in my mind, I asked if he meant the underground highway and Bill lit up like crazy. Like he was tired of having his work discounted. He went off for the entire session about the crazy weapons he hauled around on the Great American Underground Highway, his words. As Bill explained it, and corroborated Jim's story, the underground drivers are different from the above ground so as maintain separation and levels of secrecy. All the doors are guarded by black types and the scale is simply off the charts. He said that the entire nation was connected underground via these tunnels, but only near major cities were there access points, and those were usually hidden in the mountains. Just thousands of miles of giant tunnels deep underground being driven solely by government contract truckers hauling ultra-sensitive gear. I don't know how true these stories are because I have never seen them, nor can I provide any proof, but two strangers sharing a similar story definitely makes you stop and pause. Thanks for listening to me ramble about my interesting interactions over the years. My grandpa was in the Teamsters Union for over 30 years. Teamsters is a driving/trucking labor union based on the East Coast in PA, NJ, and DE. He was a great trucker. In fact, he only had one minor accident in his 30-plus years of trucking. He was coming back from a long haul and was on Highway 55 in New Jersey, which is known as the most dangerous highway in NJ. Another thing most locals know about 55 is that a large amount of Native American artifacts was dug up and found during the highway's construction and repairs. Back to the story, Gramps was 30 minutes from home, and it was dark out. He was later in his trucking career and had already had 20 years or so under his belt, and again not a single accident. Out of nowhere, anywhere from 3 to 5 human silhouettes dart out from the left side of the highway to the right. Grandpa was understandably startled and swerved his ring to the left, whereas the figures had made it to the right already. He scraped the cab and trailer against the guardrail and braked as hard as he could. His eyes darted to the rearview mirror to see the last of the figures duck into the tree line. He waited there for 10 minutes, just replaying what had just happened in his head, even though the whole ordeal was over in 5 seconds. He never got a good look at the group for obvious reasons, but said they ran with what looked like canes in their hands and were wearing rags. He is from Philly and moved to southern Jersey after he married my grandma, so yes, he is a Philly city boy big time. Of course, he knows natives existed, but never of the kind in the East, just the ones that hunt buffalo in Clint Eastwood movies. It's pretty obvious the canes were either spears or bows, and the rags the figures wore were animal hides or crude cloth. When he returned home he was still shaken and never talked with his wife, my grandma, at first. He only opened up about with his trucking friends, until one of them recommended he should indeed tell his wife about the situation. So yes, that's the story. 3 months or so ago I was on a long stretch of nothing country road outside Folsom, California, probably 2 a.m. if I had to guess. Maybe an hour since I had seen any sign of life. Pitch black, one lane running in each direction. I had kind of a weird vibe and started to space out about it. As my truck started to drift to the right a little, not paying any attention, a middle-aged, overweight, and bald man ran out of the bushes from my left wearing nothing but his generic Whitey Titan-type underwear. He was screaming at the top of his lungs, running directly at me, like running from the side, trying to jump in front of my car. He slapped the front of my truck with his hand as I blew past him at 50 miles per hour. I had my brights on, but he somehow still held crazy eye contact with me from the time he became visible up until he disappeared in my mirror. I called my cousin that was behind me for a few minutes in a U-Haul to ask if he had seen him. He said the guy just stood motionless in the other lane, only moving to turn his head and hold eye contact. We agreed there was absolutely nothing we could do as neither of us had anywhere for him to sit, had no idea where we were ourselves, hadn't seen a town or parked car for an hour, and had no means to defend ourselves against him, the trap he was setting, or who he was running from. It would probably be another 45 minutes until we saw any other sign of civilization. I had kept my eyes on the local news sites for a few days and didn't see anything. It seemed extremely supernatural. It's probably important to note that while he seemed absolutely terrified, it wasn't a run in front of the car 100 yards down the road please help me type deal. The man came out of nowhere at the last second, screaming like a banshee. Had I not been distracted and started to veer right, he would have run directly in front of my truck. I am currently a truck driver, and this happened maybe a year or so ago. It was nothing paranormal, just a bad case of sleep paralysis, but it really left me shook that night. I was on my way to Arizona on the I-10 and had just ran out of drive time, so I stopped at a truck stop on the Cali/AZ border in Blythe, California. I parked my truck in a parking spot right under a street lamp and went into the sleeper, closed my curtains and watched some videos on my phone before I went to sleep. Next thing I know I am awake, and everything seems normal. I could even see a little streak of light coming through the curtains. But I then hear someone jingling their keys and use them to open up my truck. I even felt the person sit in the driver's seat and I could hear the air releasing from the chair from the weight. I became confused and alarmed and tried to get up to see what's going on, but my body wouldn't move. I tried to yell out to the person, but I couldn't say anything either. I then hear this person turn on the truck and can even hear the crackling of the radio and the weird voice of the weather channel that my truck always defaults to when turned on. The scary part that made me panic is I started to feel the truck move. I felt the truck move forward and the long arch a truck would normally take to clear the trucks parked around it. At this point I started struggling trying to move and trying to say something, but I still can't move or talk. I panicked and then all of a sudden I got control of my body, and I jumped up and ripped the curtains open and to my surprise, no one was there. I am still parked in the same parking spot, my truck is still locked, and everything is turned off. I tried to tell myself maybe it was the truck next to me, but I looked outside, and the same trucks are parked around me. I then came to the conclusion that it was most likely sleep paralysis. This wasn't the first or last time I got sleep paralysis, but this was the most vivid one I have ever had. Also made worse by the fact I was by myself in a truck in the middle of nowhere. There were so many details that made me think it was real. It's fascinating how the mind recreates every small detail that I would normally glance over. Sorry if the story isn't too clear, writing isn't my strong suit. I work in the bush a lot, running a tow tractor for the rigs in the bush of Alberta. One night on this one hill, refused to go back to this day. One night I was sitting in my truck as usual listening to the radio, and I had a truck to pull up. So, I go down get the truck to pull him up the hill. As the light gets pointed up the hill this cat-looking thing starts walking across the road. No big deal, little move, right? Now it didn't. We ended up stopping just before the top, then it stands up and put its hands on the blade. As I looked this thing over, it looked human, almost had black eyes and a flat face, looked like it was wearing a cougar skin. Then about 5 minutes later it just walked off into the bush. It didn't make a noise or leave any tracks, mean that trucker went to the rig to unhook. I stayed at the rig that night and never went for my truck till the next morning. Whatever it was I still don't know. My cross shift shows up around 6:30 a.m. and I tell him this story, and he was saying that on his way and he seen something walking down the road that looked like a cougar but didn't leave any tracks. Fast forward about 2 years later, I find out that there's a native gravesite about 5 kilometers from where we were working. There were other things that happened, but that was as close as I came to whatever was out there. Not a truck driver, but my dad has told me this story. He's not a trucker either, but he's done a lot of driving. Fortunately, he hasn't seen this creature either. There's this thing called the black dog. It shows up when people get greedy. When truckers or drivers in general have been driving for so long, haven't seen their family, etc., this thing shows up to take everything you've got. It shows up in the middle of the road, often on isolated and dark roads, typically when the person is close to falling asleep and they see it, swerve to avoid hitting it, since they think it's a dog or some sort of animal, and often end up in a fatal one-vehicle accident. To anyone here who does drive a lot, don't push your hours, the money isn't worth it. You see this dog, or whatever form it may take, you pull over immediately and rest. You get one warning, sometimes not even that. If you ignore the first one, it'll get you the second time. I was driving my car on my way to work on Monday. I travel a lot every day to get to work. About 10 minutes into my drive, all traffic comes to a dead stop. A siren here, a siren there, and as traffic finally begins to edge forward I realize how close I really was to the accident. Probably happened 1/10 of a mile in front of me. Once the traffic was able to slowly start going again, I came up to a box truck diagonal in the left 2 lanes and an SUV on its side in front of him. The windshield was all blown out, and I could literally hear the PPL inside just screaming bloody murder. It seemed like the longest 10 seconds to pass the scene and hear the screams. Tears came to my eyes, and I drove pretty slowly to get to work. I drive way too much every week. This scared me like you can't believe. Not sure of the end result for those involved. Hopefully everyone was okay, but I really don't think they were. I can still hear their screams when I think about it. Life can change instantly, hang on to it while you can. And drive slowly. I am a small person, 5 feet, and I look young. I am not a trucker, but I lived in my SUV for a while. I was asleep in the parking lot of a small market. The owners know my SUV and don't mind me staying there. I woke up in the night because I felt a horrible sensation like someone was watching me. I wake up and yes, a strange man was peering in my window at me. I knew playing weak could be dangerous, so I jolted awake, slapped my hand against the window and screamed. And he did just that. He was gone fast. I had no idea how long he had been watching me sleep or what he was up to. I'm back home with my dad again now and saving money, but I hope that doesn't happen to me again. My dad is a truck driver with 40-ish years experience in Siberia. He used to tell me a lot of stories like back in the 90s after the fall of Soviet Union. It was a huge mess throughout the country. We call it the 90s. He would drive through the places run by criminals or ex-cons. They would put cars and tractors across the road blocking any traffic coming in and out of the place, stopping everyone at gunpoint, robbing them. He somehow, I guess because he was from around the area, managed to pass through without being robbed or even hassled much. He used to carry his shotgun under the mattress in the cab. But the creepiest story was when my older cousin Slava was killed. It was the year 2004, one evening my sister came up to me and said that Slava isn't with us anymore, one of the saddest days of my life. He was a young man in his 20s working with my dad. They had 3 trucks, with another driver along with them. They traveled down to a city called Narinjan in the south of Sakha Republic from the capital Yakutsk, loaded the cargo and parked at the usual parking place just outside the city for the night. My dad woke up at dawn to find that Slava's truck was not there. He thought the guy went to get some diesel from someone, normal practice these days to buy diesel from other truckers or people in general. Then around noon the police came and arrested my dad along with the 3rd driver. Turns out my cousin's truck was found outside the city with his body in the container. He was shot in the head with the shotgun from behind, standing on his knees. They did it to him just to get 20k rubles, $600 back then, in cash he carried with him for diesel. My dad was released after a week in jail. He was the first suspect. The killers were arrested 7 or 8 years later, and I hope they still rot in prison. They were 2 men with a previous criminal record, and their scheme was as we suspected. They approached my cousin at night and offered some diesel for a cheap price. R.I.P.
Thanks for watching. Please comment, like, share and subscribe. The Internet Surfer on YouTube for more horror and scary stories.